When John F. Kennedy became president, the White House grounds and gardens were in disrepair. They had been neglected for some time, and if you have ever looked at pictures recently of the White House, or maybe you've seen it on TV, you can tell that the gardens are in really great shape, and everything is trimmed pristinely, and there's roses, and there's all kind of flowers, and cherry blossoms, and really nicely, neatly done hedges and all those things, but it wasn't like that when JFK was in office. And so his wife, Jacqueline Kennedy, she decided, hey, I'm gonna take this as part of one of the things that I want to do. I want to bring a little ship shape to this. And so that's what she did. So she set off with two really big projects. One was the Rose Garden and transforming that. The second was the East Garden. Now, the project on the Rose Garden was completed in plenty of time. However, the project on the East Garden was interrupted because her husband was assassinated. And that immediately removed her from being First Lady. And so that project stopped. However, the First Lady that took her place, Lady Bird Johnson, she continued where Jacqueline had left off. And so she finished the remodeling of the East Garden. And then in 1965, she renamed it the Jacqueline Kennedy Garden. This is a picture of that garden from the East Wing. Now, if you've never been to the White House, let me just give you a little lay of the land. That's a picture I took from the East Wing. The West Wing would be opposite that. That you can see that little corridor to the right there. That's a hallway you can walk down. I'm right at a corner. There's a door there where you could walk out. And I asked the security if they wouldn't mind if I just took a stroll out there into that garden. They abruptly said, no, you can't do that. I thought it would have been great though, but I wanted to take a picture. The reason I actually took this picture, well, let me back up a little bit. We were in Washington, D.C. filming something that we refer to as Foundation at Home, which if you're brand new with us, you'll hear more about this year's Foundation at Home, which took place in Vegas. Wait till you see it. It's wild. But I'll give you more information on that here in a few weeks. So we were in Washington, D.C. filming 2 years ago, and this had nothing to do with what we were filming. We filmed across the street in Lafayette Park in the front yard of the White House. And backwards, that was kind of our backdrop. You can go look at it from 2022 if you want to check out Foundation Home back then. But we were there, and so some friends of ours that are part of our church, they could or may not be sitting in the room with us right now, but I'm not going to tell you their names. They hooked us up with a friend of theirs that was still active duty Secret Service and helped us get into one of the tours that you can go on in the East Wing of the White House. And so I was pumped. I'd been there before. My wife and I had gone maybe 10 or so years earlier. And then I'd been in middle school with my safety patrol squad that I was on. We went to Washington, D.C. twice. And one of those times, I got to go and check out what I thought at the time was going to be my future digs at the 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. And so I'd been in this place before, but it was still, nevertheless, you walk in, you go through a bunch of security, you walk into the East Wing, and there's this ramp. It used to be stairs, but it's ramp now. And so you walk in, and immediately the first thing you see is the windows and a little door area that leads out into this Jacqueline Kennedy garden. Well, the Secret Service agent that had helped us get in, he was on duty that day, and so he had texted me and said, hey, I'd love to meet y'all. Let me know when you get in the house. And so we were in the house, and so I texted him and said, hey, we're here. He said, where are you? And so I took this picture to show him where I was. And he's like, I got it. I'll be there in just a second. And so we moved from this little area. I had no idea I was going to use it for this message. It ended up being great. I'm glad he asked where I was or when I'm taking the picture. So we move around the area, and there's some pictures. In that particular area of the East Wing, there's a theater. It's a really great theater. It's got like this velvet, lush, red drapes and like captain's chairs. This huge screen. It's legit. If you want to go watch a movie, I don't think you can go watch a movie there. They wouldn't let me, but it was open. The door was open. You can kind of peek in. So that was happening. But as we were coming, the Secret Service agent, he had this really nice blue suit on, American flag pin. He's walking down, and you could pick him out of everybody. Everybody else looked like a tourist. He for sure was on business, and he walked up and said, hey, are you Clint? And I was like, yes, I am Clint. How did you know that? And he looked at me and he said, well, your Braves hat and the shorts in the White House kind of gave it away. And I was like, dang. Rude, but true. I mean, it's very true. It was very true. I was just trying to make myself at home. You know, that's what I was trying to do. So we started having a conversation, and I asked him, I was like, hey, I feel like I'm pretty good with words. And I feel like I could talk myself into and maybe even out of some really difficult situations because I feel pretty confident with having some conversations. So what are the chances that a guy like me could get away with opening just one closed door in the White House today? Like if I just see a closed door and I just want to say, you know what, I want to see what's behind this door. What are the chances if I touch that door handle and open that door that whatever happens, I can get out of? And he was like, not good. Like no, don't touch any doorknobs, no door handles. If it's closed, right? I was okay, got it. So that's no fun. But I did ask him, I was like, hey, is there any chance that the president is here today, like in the house, in the White House right now? Is there any chance the president's here today? And he said, I can't talk to you about that. And I was like, does that, like, I'm trying to read between the lines, you know? Like I'm trying, okay. So I said, okay, I got it. Well, if he is here, do you think maybe I could pray with him? You think maybe like I could pray with him? He said, no. I said, I got through security. I'm just wearing shorts. I got nothing on me. You know what I'm saying? I mean, these shorts are like up to here. You can see my whole thing. You know what I'm saying? I got nothing. I got a hat. You can check it. You know what I'm saying? Like I got nothing. Like can we just have a prayer? You know, just pray. And he's like, yeah. I said, so when you said no, that makes me feel like he is here. He just wouldn't want me to pray. And he was like, I didn't say that, right? I said, okay, all right. Sneaky little guy. So I said, well, if you happen to run into him and he looks like he's having a bad day, would you please tell him there's a pastor here that would love just to pray and just say some encouraging things to him? Would you be willing to do that? And he said, well, I'll tell you what. If for some reason I happen to run into the president of the United States today and he looks at me and says, his name, I'm not going to tell you his name, I don't want to put that on the live broadcast, and says, so-and-so, what are the chances there's a pastor on the East Wing tour today that would want to pray with me? If he asked me that question, I would tell him, you know what, sir, there is. And in my mind, I was just seeing Jim Carrey. So you're saying there's a chance, you know? He didn't text me back. We had a pretty lengthy conversation there in the hallway, and he was a guy that had served under multiple presidents that spanned both sides of the aisle. And you know what came across to me in that conversation? It didn't matter to him whether they were Republican or Democrat. He woke up every day and said, my life or theirs. And I think there's something to that. Over the last 4 weeks, we have been walking through one of the most political stories in the entire Bible. It's a story that starts with a guy by the name of Jacob. Now, Jacob has another name. Does anybody remember Jacob's other name? Israel. That's right. So Jacob/Israel. And so Jacob/Israel had a bunch of sons. He had a favorite in those sons. That favorite's name was Joseph. And Joseph happened to be really young. His older brothers, he was the youngest, his older brothers all hated him because of the favoritism that was shown towards him. And so eventually that favoritism and just those interactions caused his brothers to become so jealous that they decided they're gonna kill him. That was their plan. They were doing some shepherding work about 50 miles north of their home, and Joseph was sent to check on them. So he made the multi-day journey to get out there. And when they saw him coming, they were like, hey, we're going to end this guy's life. We were going to kill. Our life would be better, easier, more fulfilling if Joseph wasn't in the picture. And so that's what they decided they were going to do. They were going to kill their little brother. Well, their oldest brother, Reuben, stepped in and said, whoa, who are we? Like, what is happening here? Instead, let's just throw him in an empty well and figure out what to do. And we can't kill the kid. So that's what they do. Well, eventually some traders come through, they pull the kid out of the empty well, and they trade him or sell him into slavery. And those traders then go and sell him at a trader's or a slave auction in Egypt. And so it's wild to think he leaves home as the favorite to check on his brothers. His brothers beat the snot out of him, put him into a well, then sell him into slavery, which is still better than them killing him. But he's in slavery, and now he's going to a completely different country. He doesn't know what country he's going to, but he's going to a completely different country. He's going to wake up, and he's going to be sold at auction, to a guy that runs, or he's the captain of the guard for the Egyptian army. And sure enough, his name's Potiphar. He's sold into slavery. He starts being a slave in that guy's house. Does such an incredible job, though, that Potiphar realizes, goodness, great, like everything you touch turns to gold. Like every time you do something, it flourishes. And so he gives him more responsibility and more responsibility. Eventually, he's running the entire household. Just in time for Potiphar's wife to say, hey, good looking, what are you gotten cooking? Right? I just messed it up. And she makes advances towards him and is like, let's go take a nap together. And it happens day after day after day. And he keeps saying, no. But eventually she gets aggressive, and she is very aggressive. She takes hold of his clothes and is like, we are going to nap together today. And he's like, and he runs out of the house, leaving her with some of his clothes in her hand. And now she's got to explain, why do I have this guy's clothes in my hand? And so she makes up a story that he tried to come on to her to take a nap, and then tells everybody that's what happened. And so, of course, husband comes home. He's not happy about that. He puts him in prison, which is still better than killing him, which is probably what I would have done. Now, can I say that? It is what it is. So that's what happened, okay? Don't follow me, follow Jesus, okay? It's a really good lesson. You're learning a lot today. So that's what happened. They put him in prison. He's in prison for a long time. Ends up some guys from Pharaoh's court come down because they get in trouble. They have dreams. Joseph tells or interprets their dreams. It happens just like it. And Joseph, the only thing Joseph asks is like, hey, when you get out of prison, just remember me. They go off. They forget about Joseph. Nothing. That's where we pick up today. Genesis 41, verse 1 says this: when 2 full years had passed, Pharaoh had a dream. So now here's the deal, just to give you some context, right? That 2 years was tacked on to about 11 that already took place. So it's been about 13 years since Joseph was sold into slavery. Think about that. 13 years, almost a decade and a half since he left home, daddy's favorite, and ended up becoming a slave because his brothers couldn't stand him. That's how long it's been. Pharaoh has a dream. Let me tell you the dream. Well, he actually has 2 dreams. Let me tell you the first dream. He's dreaming, and he sees cows start coming up from the Nile, right? Nile River in Egypt. Sees these cows. There's 7 of them, and they're good-looking cows. Big, fat cows. He's like, your name is sirloin, your name is T-bone, your name is filet mignon, like this. Good-looking cows. And he's impressed with them. He's like, look at these Egyptian cows, you know? He's pumped about them. There's 7 of them. They're eating, and he's like, man, these are good-looking cows. And then, all of a sudden, things change. There's 7 more cows that come up out of the Nile. But these cows are not good-looking cows. They're skinny, ratchet-looking cows. They are nasty, emaciated, ugly cows. And now there's 14 cows. 7, no good. 7, just perfect cows. And so then, all of a sudden, the 7 no good cows look at the fat cows and are like, hey, you look like a snack. And they begin to eat the other cows. Now, here's the thing. This process. This is his dream. Crazy things happen in dreams, right? I've tried to close my eyes right now, and I'm picturing, what would it be like to dream about a skinny, emaciated cow swallowing a huge, fat heifer, you know? Like, what would that look like? And the only thing I can see is like an anaconda eating a goat, you know what I'm saying? Like, how does a tiny cow swallow a whole cow, you know what I'm saying? Like, how does that happen? And he woke up, like whatever that visual is, to make that skinny cow, it woke him up like it was a nightmare. And all of a sudden he's like, whew, it was just a dream. Of course it was a dream, Pharaoh. Cows don't eat cows. I mean, they might, I don't know. They don't even eat them like that, right? So then he goes back to sleep. Second dream is he's got 7 heads of grain. They're healthy, they look good, they're all on one stalk. It's like, man, this is good looking Egyptian grain. And then all of a sudden, 7 more heads of grain sprout. But these 7 are thin, and they're scorched by an east wind. And all of a sudden, the thin heads of grain begin to eat and swallow up the healthy, full heads of grain. So now these heads of grain got mouths. You know what I'm saying? They were just minding their own business, but all of a sudden they turned into, like, you know, grain eaters. Pharaoh woke up. It had been a dream. Now, the next morning, he remembered his dreams. Anybody have dreams you can never remember the next day? You know what I'm talking about? You're like, man, I can't wait to tell somebody. And I'm the only one that does that. I dream and can't remember them. Okay, thank you. Now I feel seen. This is good. So, like, you have that dream, like, I'm going to have to tell, sometimes but the next morning, he had no problem. He woke up, and he's like, I'm still troubled by it. This makes no sense to me. So he calls together all of his folks. He's like, look, advisors, here's the deal. These are my dreams. I know they got to mean something. What do they mean? Nothing. They got nothing. He calls in some magicians. He calls in some wise men. He summons them all and say, hey, this is what my dream was. What does it mean? And they're like, we got nothing. Now, it's at this point, I'm thinking, why would you not just make something up? Like, how is he going to know? Like, just say like, oh, the fat cows were like when you take 7 deep breaths. And the skinny cows are like when you take shallow breaths. And if you keep breathing shallow, Pharaoh, you're gonna stop breathing, right? It's like, I don't know, make something up. Like, just generally speaking, 7 and 7, just do something he can't prove one way or the other. Like, let's keep my job here. That's what I would be thinking. But they're just honest with him. Like, we have no idea. We don't know what this means. Then all of a sudden, the chief cupbearer, which if you were here last week, Jason walked you through. He was one of the guys in prison that had a dream that Joseph told the dream. The chief cupbearer said to Pharaoh, Genesis 41, 9 through 11. Then the chief cupbearer said to Pharaoh, today I'm reminded of my shortcomings. Pharaoh was once angry with his servants, and he imprisoned me and the chief baker in the house of the captain of the guard. Each of us had a dream the same night, and each dream had a meaning of its own. And so all of a sudden, the cupbearer is like, oh, I know somebody who can interpret dreams. But he was trying to think in his mind, like, how do I tell Pharaoh I know someone who interprets dreams? And he's going to ask me, well, where is he? And I'm going to have to say he's in prison. And that's going to remind him that he put me in prison because I messed up one time, right? And so he's probably thinking like, and I didn't remember until now, but now I'm reminded. There's no doubt in my mind. When you have a dream, to go back to last week, there was a cupbearer and a baker. The baker had a dream that he was going to be executed, though he didn't know what that meant. And the cupbearer had a dream he was going to be restored. They went to Joseph. Joseph told him the dreams, and it happened just as Joseph said. One guy was impaled in public execution. The other guy was restored to us. There's no chance that guy forgot, number one, that dream and the moment that Joseph told him, this is what it means, and this is exactly what happened. There's no chance. So for him to say, well, today I happen to remember, he just didn't want to remind Pharaoh, oh, by the way, at one point you put me in prison, you were so mad at me, That's what happened. And so he tells him reluctantly, hey, this guy, he told us. It was a young Hebrew that was in prison with me. He told me exactly what they meant. And so Pharaoh summoned him. Genesis 41, 14 through 15. So Pharaoh sent for Joseph, and he was quickly brought from the dungeon. When he had shaved and changed his clothes, he came before Pharaoh. Pharaoh said to Joseph, I had a dream. No one can interpret it, but I have heard it said of you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it. And at this point, I'm thinking, what an opportunity. This is so good. 13 years he's been a slave, a servant, or in prison. 13 years. None of them by his doing. Didn't deserve a lick of it. And all of a sudden, he's standing in front of the most powerful guy in the entire country, asking him for a favor. He's like, I hear that you got something that I could really be benefited from. And I'm thinking to myself, like, this is the moment. Like, this is the opportunity. Joseph, say something smart. Joseph, say, hey, I probably could tell you what that dream means. But the thing is, this Potiphar's wife has got me stuck in prison. So can we make a trade? Like, that's what I'm thinking Joseph should say. Joseph doesn't say that. He says something much dumber than that. This is what he says. Genesis 41, 16. I cannot do it. Joseph replied to Pharaoh, but God will give Pharaoh the answer he desires. What a suck up. Like, Joseph. Like, why do we have to go there? Number one, the guy that you're talking to thinks he's a god. That's what pharaohs do, right? They're like, I'm actually a god. So when you say that God, capital G, God, can do it, you're telling him, I know you think you're pretty big stuff, Pharaoh, but honestly, there's a guy I talk to, he's bigger than you are. That's number one you're saying. The second thing you're saying is, hey, by the way, my capital G God, all the rest of the gods that y'all got, obviously they don't compare to the big G God that I got. And by the way, my big G God still talks to me in your prison, by the way. And I'm just thinking, Joseph, this is not the time to be religious, you know? This is not the time. That shows the difference between probably my initial reaction and probably the best reaction. But Joseph, honestly, doesn't make sense because Joseph just keeps doing what Joseph always does. It doesn't matter the circumstances. The only thing that matters is, am I obedient to God? Put me in slavery, doesn't change who I am. Make me a servant, doesn't change who I am. Throw me in prison for something I didn't do, it doesn't change who I am. Which is puzzling to me because, let's think about this. Joseph's been either in slavery, a servant, or prison for 13 years. And it's not like he was there with a bunch of other people. It's not like he was in prison with a Bible study. He's the only guy following Yahweh in his little circle of friends. Yeah, that's what you want to call him. The only one. So it's not like he even had a pastor to come visit him in prison to say, hey, keep the fight, keep going, fight the good fight, keep the faith. None of that. 13 years. And he just remains faithful, so much so he has an opportunity to get out of jail free. And the first person he wants to point to is, I can't do anything, but my God can. And I would be thinking, well, then why don't your God get you out of my prison if I was Pharaoh? That's what I'd be thinking. Like, your God can tell you my dream, but he wants to leave you in prison for something you didn't commit. I got you. Everybody's innocent, right? You know, if that's not something for us to learn from, I don't know what it is. We are so circumstantially driven in our world. Our circumstances have so much say in the type of person we are. Which makes sense why both parties thinks the world's going to end if the other party wins. Because if our circumstances become poor, all of a sudden our lives are over. But Joseph said, I could care less about my circumstances because my circumstances can't touch who I am and what I will do every day, which is wake up and say, God, what do you want me to do today? And then say, yes, sir, I'll get on it. And so Joseph tells him what it means. He says, Pharaoh, the thing is that honestly, the dreams are one and the same. You know, the 7 cows, the 7 of healthy grain, the 7 healthy cows, they represent 7 years of just remarkable plenty, abundance. And you're gonna have more resources than Egypt's ever seen. It's gonna be so, in fact, the Bible goes on to tell us that they started to count the resources, and eventually they had so much in those 7 years that's coming. They just stopped counting. That's how much they had. And he just said, we're gonna have 7 years of crazy abundance. And then the 7 lean cows, the 7 east wind stalks that were kind of dried up and small, those are gonna represent 7 years of hardly anything, famine, just desolate. And the reason God gave you those 2 dreams is because he wants you to know it's almost time for that first 7 years to start. And so he tells them that's what the dream means. 7 years of plenty, abundance, followed by 7 years of famine and nothing. Now, that's what Pharaoh asked him to share. Now, Joseph, though, after he told him the interpretation of the dream, decided on his own, you know what? Since I'm talking, let me give you a little more than just the interpretation. He says in Genesis 41:33, and now let Pharaoh look for a discerning and wise man and put him in charge of the land of Egypt. Wink. Who could that be? And just in case Pharaoh didn't pick up on the plan, he said, for instance, verse 34, let Pharaoh appoint commissioners over the land to take a fifth of the harvest of Egypt during the 7 years of abundance. They should collect all the food of these good years that are coming and store up the grain under the authority of Pharaoh to be kept in the cities for food. This food should be held in reserve for the country to be used during the 7 years of famine that will come upon Egypt, so that the country may not be ruined by the famine. So he's like, look for a guy who can do something like, I don't know, this. And he lays out a plan. And then, verse 37 says, the plan seemed good to Pharaoh and to all his officials. So Pharaoh asked them, can we find anyone like this man in whom is the Spirit of God? The Pharaoh said to Joseph, since God has made all this known to you, there is no one so discerning and wise as you. You shall be in charge of my palace and of all my people, and all my people are to submit to your orders. Only with respect to the throne will I be greater than you. Jackpot. Let's go. That's what I'm talking about, Joseph. Like this is what I'm looking for. This is what I'm looking for. And immediately, as I'm thinking through, as Pharaoh's talking, I'm thinking, I'm in charge of everybody but you? Wait till Potiphar's wife hears. We got to have a conversation. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's what I'm thinking. That's what I'm thinking. If I'm Joseph, that's what I'm thinking. Girl, we about to talk. But then, honestly, reality sets in the very next verse. Genesis 41:46. Joseph was 30 years old when he entered the service of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. And the reason reality set in is because he left home at 17. And not only had it been 13 years that he hadn't seen his family, 13 years since he hadn't encountered anyone that believed in the God he believed in. He had been a slave and then promoted kind of as a servant and then thrown in prison for a number of years. And now he was, technically he was out of prison, but he still couldn't go home. He had 14 years ahead of him. He had the 7 good years, the 7 bad years, and he needed to oversee the entire thing. And so he's 30 years old, knowing that I won't see my dad till I'm maybe 44, like at best. We fast forward just a few verses. I'm just going to summarize it for you. It starts to lay out how Joseph pulled this off, because it happens just like Joseph said. There were 7 years followed by another 7 years, and Joseph prepared the way he was supposed to and had everything ready to go. The Bible tells us, though, at the end of this little section, before we get into next week's, it says that all the world came to buy grain from Joseph. Like the famine got so bad, extended beyond Egypt, that all the world came to buy grain from Joseph. So 13 years as a slave, imprisoned, another 13 years of work. And that 14th year, he realized that the entire world came to buy grain because of his preparation. That's wild. I mean, by the time Joseph's in his mid-40s, 2/3 of his life, over half, almost 2/3 of his life, he's not been home. His entire adult life, he's not been home. And the thing is, like when Joseph left home that day, whenever his dad was like, hey, go check on your brothers. In his mind, he wasn't like, my life was about to drastically change. He was going to go find those knuckleheads doing whatever those knuckleheads were doing and come back and say, hey, they're still knuckleheads, Dad, but the sheep are still alive, so we're fine. And then he was going to move on with his favorite son life. But instead, they jump him, put him in a well, put him into slavery. And then from there, once he's a slave in another country, you know what he's thinking? I got to not be a slave anymore. Like, how do I work myself out of it? Like, how do I get home? Never in his wildest imagination was he thinking as a slave at Potiphar's house, one day it'd be cool to run this country. Like this, that would be pretty neat. That never entered his mind. When he gets put into prison for something he didn't do, as he's sitting there in prison for years, it never entered his mind. You know what? If I do a really good job at cleaning the prison around here, one day I might run this place. And then when Pharaoh called him out of the dungeon, gave him a shave, a shower, and some new clothes, and he stood in front of Pharaoh and said, hey, I had a dream. There was never a single moment that Joseph was thinking, you know what, if I pull this off right, he might put me in charge of the entire country. At best, he was thinking, maybe he'll let me go home. Maybe he'll let me go home. It wasn't until Pharaoh actually says, can we actually find another guy that's better than him? And they're all shaking their heads because Pharaoh's like, yeah, and when Pharaoh does this, everybody else does this. That's the way Pharaohs work. And they're like, yeah, Pharaoh, you're right. And all of a sudden he looks at Joseph like, you're in charge of the whole thing. Not me, but you're in charge of the whole thing. Everything else you're in charge of. And in that moment, it's like, God, what am I doing here? Probably the exact same question he asked when he was sold as a slave. God, why am I here? And the same reason, the same expression given to God when he's put in prison for something he didn't do. As a man of integrity, like, God, why am I here? And all of a sudden, he's second in command of one of the greatest nations in the common world at that moment. And he's like, what am I doing here? Now, the thing is, zero chance that Pharaoh aligned with Joseph religiously. Zero chance. Zero chance that Pharaoh aligned with Joseph's morals and ethics. No chance. No chance. For sure, Pharaoh would not have identified himself as someone that submits to an almighty God. No chance. Yet all of a sudden, Joseph had an opportunity to help out someone who was completely opposite of him. And what was Joseph's response to the opportunity? I'm going to wake up every day and I'm going to ask God, what do you want from me? And then my response is going to be, yes, sir. Now, here's the hard part. Here's the hard part. Let's talk about you and me. There's a political move that can be made. I'm going to say it and then I'm going to get to the hard part. Here we go. The political move is this. You know the right thing to do, but refuse to engage because you disagree on other issues. And honestly, you hope they fail. This is hard today because it's no longer theory. It's reality. You know, around 2 a.m, the day after the election, it was called. And about half the country was pumped. And the other half of the country, not so pumped. One half of the country was like, man, we just saved our country. And the other half of the country is like, I think we just killed our country. Now, when I wrote the content for this message, I wrote it before the summer started. I knew we would get to this Sunday, the Sunday after the election. I didn't know who was going to have the harder time with the message, whether it be Republicans or Democrats. I didn't know. And maybe you say you knew, right? Maybe you say, oh, well, I knew this the whole time. Okay, well, then maybe you're special. Give yourself a pat on the back. You should probably go work for one of the news outlets that all got it wrong. It was like, hey, this thing's going to be super close. Okay. And maybe you heard a poll last week that was like, man, she's up 9 points or something in Iowa. And you're like, good gracious, this is going to be incredible. And then maybe the other half of the folks were like, oh, no way, Iowa's going blue. That just proves that it's not going to work, right? This is just missing propaganda. And I don't know which side either of you are on. But that's what was happening. And all of a sudden, the race is called. Half people are happy, half people are miserable. And so here's the thing. I didn't know which side I was going to be talking to this Sunday, other than I have committed to have the hard conversation we're about to have. And I didn't know whether it was going to start with Republicans, let me tell you something, or Democrats, let me tell you something. Truth is that there was a side that won and a side that lost. And so the hard part today, I didn't know it, but it's coming to you Democrats. It's hard. And it's hard because it's not a theory anymore. It's reality. And the truth is, the way our world works and our political system is that when one side gets elected, immediately the other side begins to get them unelected. Which means that even when there's an opportunity to do something good, they will refrain from it, because if they help them do it, it helps them stay in power. And they don't want that. They would prefer them fail so that they have a case to remove them, and then they can put in who they want, even at the detriment of their own person. And that's not just Democrats, that's Republicans and Democrats, 100%. Because if you're a Republican in this room and you're thinking you're off scot-free, let me tell you how awful the Republicans were the last 4 years. It was absolutely atrocious. Atrocious. And the Democrats are lined up to do the exact same thing. Absolutely disgusting. That we would harm our children and our futures just because we want the person in power that we disagree with to lose, so we have a case to remove them. That just doesn't make any sense to me. Unless your identity and you're driven by something that actually isn't your identity and should be driving you. If all of a sudden what happened in Washington, D.C. has made or broken your life, well, then it makes sense why you would respond so stupidly. Absolutely stupid, both sides. Why would we want someone that's running anything to be a failure just so we can replace them with someone we like? That makes no sense. Now, again, I didn't know who I'd be talking to today, but I knew that I have to say it out loud. And there might be some of you that are extremely frustrated at this, but it's the truth, and it wouldn't have mattered who won. It wouldn't have mattered. The talking point for me was the exact same. Now, I will say this also. While the losing party, whenever it is, whatever election cycle it is, knows how to sabotage or break things, whatever, the truth is, a lot of times the excuse comes up and says, well, they wouldn't do the same for us. You're probably right. In fact, you're not probably right, you are 100% right. The thing is, over the last number of elections, going back to at least in my lifetime, it's gotten worse and progressively worse and worse, but this is the way it happens almost every single time. Which means that we need someone to step up and do it differently. Now, you can't affect what happens in Washington, D.C., for those of you who voted blue this past week. You can't. You can't affect that. Not today, anyway. But what you can do is you can begin having conversations in your circle of friends that paint a different way forward, where you begin to lead differently. Where when it comes up and all of a sudden it's like, hey, here's whatever the complaint is, and I'm not gonna get into specifics, whatever the complaint is, that you can step in and say, hey, you know what? The thing is, for you and I both, it would be great if he ended up being a really good thing for the United States. That would be the best thing. So how do we figure out that? How do we do that? Now, at the same time, for those of you who voted Republican this past week, a bunch of I told you so's and finger pointing, and I hope you get on the next plane out of the country, that doesn't help either. Why would we want to look at people and say, because you disagreed with me and because you made such a loud mouth about it, I wish you would leave and get away from my presence? That goes back to political move number one. When people disagree with us, we get rid of them. We don't want to do that. No. We've got to be better than that, church. And there might not be another church in this county that says that and is willing to say it, because I realize politics is such a hot button issue. It's so polarizing that literally half of you might not come back next Sunday. But the truth is, it's still worth being said. We've got to do it differently. And I didn't know who would win or who would lose. I don't know. I love politics, but I could have told you. If you had put a gun in my head last week and said, tell me, I don't know. I don't know. But the truth is the same regardless of where we're at. So there's a political move. There's also a spiritual move. Spiritual move is this: teamwork. Together, we help people because it's the right thing to do, not because of who will get the credit. And this is so hard. It's so hard. And my prayer and my hope is that your prayer over these next few weeks would be that the greatest leaders in our community would be Democrats. That's my prayer. I'm hoping, I am praying that people that voted for Kamala Harris will be incredible, just beacons of light and unity, not compromising what they believe are their principles, but a place that says, hey, here, this is the way forward. And I'm hoping and praying that those who voted Republican will be the most magnanimous and generous and gracious of winners. And it's my hope that our community sees this church as something that is so different than what they would expect from any body of believers. Now, the truth is, I just mentioned that the spiritual move, this teamwork together, we help people because it's the right thing to do, not because of who will get the credit. I said it's hard. It's hard to continue, but let me just tell you something. You've already been doing it. You've already been doing it. If you've been a part of Foundation, you've already been doing it. If you've given a single penny to Foundation, you've already been doing it. You've already been doing exactly this really difficult thing. Because the truth is, we care about the food insecure in our community. And so we provide access to food. Good food. Not like scraps off our dinner table, but if you're food insecure in our community, we have food. We will help make it happen. We care about unexpected pregnancies. So we provide resources, good resources, valuable resources, game-changing resources, life-giving resources. Whether you're Republican, or Democrat, or independent, we together have been doing that for years. We care about at-risk kids, so we mentor consistently. We are dependable. Republican, Democrat, independent, we have been doing that for years. We care about all people, every color of skin. And so we create a place to belong. And we have been doing that. Republican, Democrat, independent. And we have been doing that for years. We care about the distressed and the anxious, so we provide counseling. Republican, Democrat, and independent. We have been doing that for years. We care about families, so we reinforce them. We help strengthen them. And Republican, Democrat, and independent, we have been doing that for years. We care about the sick, so we support them. But you can't guess what I'm going to say next. Republican, Democrat, and independent. And we have been doing that for years. We care about the addict. So we provide opportunities to get clean, to start fresh, and take it one day at a time. And we, Republicans, Democrats, independents, we have been doing that for years. We care about the next generation, so we invest in them. Republican, Democrat, independent, and we have been doing that for years. We are people who voted Republican, people who voted Democrat, people who voted independent, people who didn't vote at all, and we care about people, so we do the right thing. All of us. Together, period. And that's because of who leads us. And it's not a president, but it's a king. And not just any king. He's a king of kings. You know, people ask me all the time, especially in political seasons. They'll come and they'll pull me aside and they'll want to have a conversation. We'll have lunch. And it's a common question. And they'll ask me, so just, Clint, be honest. Be honest. If Jesus were here today, would he be a Republican or a Democrat? They ask me all the time. All the time. I tell them, I say, if Jesus were standing in front of you, he would look at you and say, kid, you're asking the wrong question. The question you should be asking is, will Republicans and Democrats be Christians? Because I don't fall into anything you've ever created. This Republican, Democrat stuff doesn't meet my standards. And the truth is, he would also look at you and say, and I honestly don't care what you think about it. Because with me, it's not a democracy. You can vote all day, but I already know what's right. It's my way or no way. You know, this is why I have so much hope for our community, because of what Jesus is already and has been doing for years in our church. Because when Jesus taught his followers to pray, he said, when you pray, pray like this. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be your name. Here's the good part. And then pray, your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And you see, that whole list I just read, that all of us together, Republicans, Democrats, Independents, have been doing together, all of those for years, that is the kingdom of God here on earth. That is the will of Jesus here on earth. And we've already been doing it. Jesus would often say, when he was teaching in the crowds, he would say something like, pay attention, because the kingdom of heaven is at hand. Or he would say, pay close attention, because the kingdom of heaven is among you. You see, Jesus recognized that if we will do what Joseph did, which is not pay attention so much to our circumstances, but our response every single day, then when we wake up in the morning, we won't be thinking through the lens of circumstantial politics. We will be thinking through the lens of, who has God called me to be today, to fall under his leadership, his kingship. That's what we will think. That's the only way Joseph makes it 13 years as a slave and in prison, and still is looked at as someone with enormous integrity. Think about that. A slave sold by his own family as a slave, imprisoned for an attempted affair with his boss's wife. And yet Pharaoh says, I can trust you. You don't get there unless his mindset had nothing to do with circumstances and everything to do with who he was called to be, regardless of circumstances. And that's where we are. Republican, Democrat, Independent, and I don't care. All four categories. Circumstances, they will change. They will come and go. But who we are ought to be consistent. It is my hope that every single Sunday you don't drown me out as we close every one of our gatherings. Because the last thing I want you to hear from me every week is Jesus is in the lead.